Ma'am, if you don't stop talking, you're going in cuffs. The officer's voice cut through the humid Georgia afternoon, sharp enough to silence the restless crowd gathering outside the neighborhood community center. Conversations faded. Cell phones slowly rose into the air. Even the fluttering American flag above the entrance seemed to hang motionless for a heartbeat. The woman standing beside the patrol car never raised her voice. She appeared to be in her late 50s, wearing a faded navy windbreaker, blue jeans, and comfortable walking shoes that had clearly seen countless miles. A canvas tote bag rested against her side, and a pair of reading glasses hung from a simple cord around her neck. There was nothing about her appearance that suggested authority, influence, or fame. She looked like someone who had spent a lifetime putting others before herself. Her name was Angela Brooks, though no one on that street seemed to recognize it. A few minutes earlier, she had been walking back from a Veterans Remembrance breakfast held just 3 blocks away, carrying nothing more than a folded event program and a quiet sense of gratitude for friends whose names now lived only on polished stone memorials. Then she noticed the growing commotion. A nervous teenage boy stood near the sidewalk while 2 officers questioned him after someone reported a disturbance nearby. The young man appeared frightened, answering carefully while neighbors watched from a distance. Angela slowed her pace, listening before speaking. Her words were calm, measured, almost gentle. "Officer, if he isn't under arrest, he has the right to know whether he's free to leave." Her tone carried neither anger nor accusation. It sounded more like a respectful reminder than a challenge. Officer Ryan Walker turned toward her with visible irritation. Young, ambitious, and eager to establish control over the scene, he interpreted her calm confidence as interference. "This doesn't concern you, ma'am." Angela nodded politely. "I understand. I'm simply asking that everyone be treated fairly." Several people exchanged uncertain glances. One elderly man quietly whispered, "She's right." But Sergeant Ethan Cole, supervising the scene from only a few feet away, folded his arms and stepped closer. The atmosphere shifted almost instantly. Authority replaced conversation. Walker's jaw tightened. "You've been warned." Angela never moved toward the officers. She never pointed a finger. She never raised her hands. She remained exactly where she stood, shoulders relaxed, meeting their eyes with the steady composure of someone who had spent decades remaining calm while others lost theirs. "Respectfully," she answered. "Asking a question isn't the same as refusing an order." The sentence barely settled into the summer air before Ryan Walker reached for his handcuffs. Gasps rippled through the crowd as he informed her she was being detained for interfering with an active investigation. Angela neither resisted nor argued. She quietly placed her canvas bag on the hood of the patrol car before extending her wrists with remarkable dignity, almost as though she refused to allow the moment to diminish anyone's humanity, including the officers standing before her. Somewhere behind the growing circle of onlookers, a child tugged at his mother's sleeve and whispered, "Mom, why are they taking that lady?" No one answered. Phones continued recording. A live stream notification appeared on hundreds of screens within seconds. The afternoon traffic rolled slowly past, unaware that within the next hour, this ordinary-looking woman in simple clothes would force an entire city to question everything it thought it knew about respect, service, and the true meaning of leadership. Officer Ryan Walker guided Angela Brooks toward the rear seat of the patrol vehicle with practiced efficiency, convinced the situation had already been resolved. The murmurs from the crowd faded behind the closing door, replaced by the quiet hum of the air conditioning and the distant rhythm of traffic moving through the intersection. Angela settled into the seat without complaint, folded her hands gently in her lap, and gazed through the window as sunlight reflected across the glass storefronts lining the opposite side of the street. There was no fear in her expression, no bitterness, only the calm patience of someone who had spent a lifetime understanding that character revealed itself most clearly when circumstances became uncomfortable. On the front passenger seat rested her canvas tote bag, its zipper slightly open where the folded memorial program remained tucked inside beside a weathered notebook, a pair of reading glasses, and a small leather wallet that no one had bothered to examine. Sergeant Ethan Cole glanced toward the vehicle before turning back to the gathering crowd. He instructed another officer to finish collecting witness statements while reassuring nearby residents that the matter was under control. Several people quietly dispersed, but others stayed, continuing to record with their phones, uncertain whether they had just witnessed an ordinary misunderstanding or something that would become tomorrow's headline. Across the street, the teenage boy Angela had spoken up for stood beside his grandmother, who watched the patrol car with growing concern. She was only trying to help, the boy whispered. His grandmother rested a reassuring hand on his shoulder. Sometimes the truth takes time to catch up, she replied softly. Inside the patrol vehicle, Angela slowly looked down at her left wrist, where a pale line circled her skin. Years of wearing a military-issued watch had left its mark long after the watch itself had been retired. Her fingertips brushed that familiar outline for only a moment before returning to her lap. The gesture was almost unconscious, a quiet habit formed over decades of early morning briefings, overseas deployments, and ceremonies attended under skies both peaceful and uncertain. She remembered another afternoon many years before, standing on a dusty airfield as young service members looked toward her for reassurance during an evacuation mission complicated by uncertainty and exhaustion. Back then, remaining calm had not simply been a personal choice. It had been a responsibility shared with everyone who depended on steady leadership. That same discipline now settled over her like a familiar uniform, even though today she wore only denim and a windbreaker. Officer Walker climbed into the driver's seat, adjusted the rearview mirror, and finally looked directly at her reflection. For a brief instant, he noticed something he had overlooked before. It was not confidence alone. It was composure shaped by experience, the kind that could not be imitated or borrowed. Still, he dismissed the thought almost immediately. You could have avoided all of this, he said, shaking his head. Angela answered in the same measured tone she had used since the beginning. Perhaps. But if remaining silent means someone loses fairness they deserve, silence becomes its own decision. Walker gave a short sigh and started entering information into the computer mounted beside the dashboard. He requested a routine identity verification, expecting an ordinary response within minutes. Neither he nor Sergeant Cole realized that the simple electronic request had already begun traveling through databases connected far beyond their local jurisdiction. Several miles away, inside a federal military administration building, a secure notification quietly appeared on a monitor. An analyst reviewing personnel verification paused, frowned at the unexpected alert, and immediately reached for the telephone. Without anyone on that quiet neighborhood street realizing it, a chain of calls had just begun that would soon reach offices where Angela Brooks was known not as an ordinary citizen, but as someone whose lifetime of service had earned the respect of thousands who had served under her command. The dispatcher acknowledged the identification request without hesitation, treating it like thousands of others processed every day. Officer Ryan Walker leaned back in his seat, convinced the system would return an ordinary driver's license, a local address, and perhaps a minor traffic citation from years ago. Instead, the response remained unusually delayed. He frowned at the loading indicator before tapping the screen again. Must be a network issue, he muttered under his breath. Sergeant Ethan Cole approached the driver's side window, resting one hand lightly on the door frame. Everything finished? He asked. Ryan shrugged, still waiting for verification. The database is running slower than usual. Ethan glanced toward the rear seat where Angela Brooks remained quietly seated, her eyes following a pair of sparrows hopping across the sidewalk outside the community center. Children who had been attending an after-school reading program slowly emerged from the building with their parents, laughing as they carried colorful backpacks toward waiting cars. Angela smiled faintly as one little girl waved at her through the patrol car window. She returned the wave with gentle warmth, causing the child to smile even wider before running to catch up with her father. Ryan noticed the exchange in the mirror, but dismissed it as another attempt to appear harmless. She certainly stays calm, he remarked. Ethan answered confidently. Some people think sounding polite means they can ignore lawful instructions. Confidence is not the same thing as being right. Angela heard every word, yet offered no response. She simply folded the memorial program resting on her lap a little more neatly, revealing the corner of a photograph printed inside. It showed a group of aging veterans standing together beneath rows of American flags earlier that morning. Most of the faces wore quiet smiles earned through decades of shared sacrifice rather than public recognition. Across town, inside the Regional Military Administration Office, The analyst who had received the automated verification alert continued reviewing the secure personnel record now displayed across two monitors. The profile carried multiple access restrictions, each requiring higher authorization before additional details could be viewed. The analyst read the name again to make certain there had been no mistake. Angela Marie Brooks. Retired active duty status. Four-star general. Multiple presidential commendations. Current advisor to the Department of Defense. He immediately contacted his supervisor, speaking with measured urgency while forwarding the verification request to Washington through secure channels. Back on the neighborhood street, none of those conversations were visible. Only ordinary life continued beneath the bright afternoon sun. Delivery trucks passed the intersection. A city bus stopped to collect passengers. Wind stirred the oak trees lining the sidewalks, scattering a few dry leaves across the pavement despite the warmth of late summer. The peaceful setting made the growing uncertainty feel strangely out of place. Ryan refreshed the patrol computer once more. This time a brief notification appeared instead of the expected identification summary. Access temporarily restricted. Await supervisory confirmation. His eyebrows narrowed. That is strange, he admitted. Ethan leaned closer to the screen. Probably someone with sealed employment records or federal contracting work. Neither man considered any possibility beyond that. They had already built a story in their minds based on appearances, and every new piece of information was being forced to fit that assumption. Meanwhile, Angela quietly watched sunlight dance across the polished badge hanging from Ryan's shoulder. After several thoughtful seconds, she spoke in the same calm voice that had never once risen above conversation. Officer, every profession carries great responsibility. The difficult part is remembering that respect is strongest when it is offered before it is demanded. Ryan looked into the rearview mirror again, meeting her steady eyes for only a moment before another electronic tone interrupted the silence. This notification was different. The patrol computer displayed a priority message instructing the officers to remain at their current location and await immediate contact from a federal liaison. Both Ryan and Ethan stared at the screen in complete silence, realizing for the first time that this routine encounter was no longer routine at all. The priority notification remained on the patrol computer, its blue banner glowing against the dashboard while neither officer spoke. Sergeant Ethan Cole finally reached for his radio, his voice noticeably more careful than before. Dispatch answered almost immediately, but offered only one instruction. Remain on scene. Do not transport the individual. A federal representative will contact you directly. Ethan looked toward Ryan, searching for an explanation that neither of them possessed. Federal? Ryan repeated quietly. For what? Dispatch declined to elaborate, ending the transmission with unusual formality. Across the street, several residents still lingered behind the yellow safety tape. The live stream that had begun only minutes earlier continued attracting viewers as comments poured across countless screens. Some questioned what had happened. Others debated whether the officers had acted too quickly. Most simply waited, sensing that the story was far from over. Inside the patrol vehicle, Angela Brooks remained composed. Warm afternoon sunlight slipped through the rear window, casting soft golden reflections across the folded memorial program resting beside her. She glanced once toward the community center where volunteers were stacking folding chairs after the veterans' breakfast. Their laughter drifted faintly through the open summer air, ordinary sounds that somehow made the tension surrounding the patrol car feel even heavier. Ryan finally turned halfway toward the back seat. "Ma'am," he began, choosing his words more carefully than before. "Is there something about your employment or background that we should know?" Angela met his eyes with the same steady expression she had carried from the beginning. "My background has taught me that patience often reveals more than arguments ever will." Ryan waited for additional explanation, but none came. Her answer was neither evasive nor confrontational. It simply invited time to do what emotion could not. Ethan folded his arms and looked down the quiet street. "People usually tell us immediately if they have government credentials." Angela smiled politely. "Some professions require introductions. Others require humility." The sentence lingered inside the vehicle long after she finished speaking. It was impossible to mistake her confidence, yet there was no trace of arrogance. She never hinted at rank. She never demanded special treatment. She simply accepted the present moment with remarkable discipline. Nearly 40 miles away, 3 black sport utility vehicles exited the interstate under a state police escort. Inside the lead vehicle, Lieutenant General Marcus Whitfield reviewed information on a secure tablet while speaking through a hands-free communication system. Confirm location. The response came instantly. Community Center on Jefferson Avenue. Local officers remain on scene as instructed. Marcus nodded once. Maintain professional protocol. No unnecessary attention until we arrive. The convoy continued through afternoon traffic with quiet precision. Back at the neighborhood intersection, Ryan refreshed the patrol computer once again. This time the restricted notice disappeared, replaced by a single line that immediately drained the color from his face. Authorized federal personnel en route. Do not process or release pending direct coordination. No additional information followed. Ryan slowly turned the monitor toward Ethan. The sergeant stared at the screen without blinking. I have never seen this level of response, he admitted under his breath. Before either officer could say another word, a young patrol officer approached from the sidewalk, carrying Angela's canvas tote bag. Sergeant, he said respectfully. This was left on the hood of the cruiser. I thought she might want it inside. Ethan accepted the bag and unzipped it just enough to ensure there were no valuables exposed. On top rested the folded Veterans Program beside a simple silver challenge coin engraved with an eagle, 13 stars, and the words Duty, Honor, Country. The young officer looked at the coin with quiet curiosity. That looks military. Ethan gently turned it over. On the reverse side was a name engraved with remarkable precision. Angela M. Brooks. The sergeant studied the lettering for several silent seconds, an unfamiliar feeling settling over him as pieces of a much larger picture slowly began falling into place while, somewhere in the distance, the faint sound of approaching sirens echoed through the warm Georgia afternoon. The distant sirens grew louder until 3 black sport utility vehicles turned onto Jefferson Avenue with quiet precision, followed by 2 unmarked federal sedans that rolled to a smooth stop several yards behind the patrol cars. The neighborhood fell into complete silence. Curious conversations disappeared. Even the live streams capturing every moment seemed to pause as dozens of eyes focused on the arriving convoy. Their doors opened almost simultaneously. Men and women in neatly pressed military service uniforms stepped onto the pavement with disciplined confidence, their polished shoes catching the afternoon sunlight. At their center walked Lieutenant General Marcus Whitfield, his posture unmistakable even from across the street. His silver hair reflected beneath the warm Georgia sky as he surveyed the scene with calm restraint rather than urgency. He spoke briefly with a federal liaison before his attention settled on the patrol vehicle. Sergeant Ethan Cole instinctively straightened his uniform, while Officer Ryan Walker stood motionless beside the driver's door, uncertain whether to approach or wait. Marcus crossed the remaining distance without raising his voice. Which officer initiated this detention? He asked evenly. Ryan stepped forward. I did, sir. Marcus gave a respectful nod. Thank you for your honesty. There was no accusation in his tone, only professionalism that somehow felt heavier than anger. He then looked toward the rear seat, where Angela Brooks remained quietly waiting. The moment his eyes met hers, everything changed. Without hesitation, Marcus stood perfectly upright and rendered a crisp military salute. Every uniformed service member behind him immediately followed, their movements synchronized with years of disciplined training. The unexpected display froze everyone watching. Phones remained lifted, but no one spoke. Ryan blinked in disbelief. Ethan's expression slowly shifted from confusion to stunned realization. Marcus waited several seconds before speaking. Good afternoon, General Brooks. Angela returned the salute with quiet dignity from her seated position before lowering her hand with the same calm grace she had carried all afternoon. Good afternoon, Marcus, she replied warmly. I hope the drive was not too difficult. Not at all, ma'am, he answered. We came as quickly as possible. The word ma'am landed over the intersection like a bell. Several officers exchanged bewildered glances. One deputy quietly whispered, General? Another looked toward the challenge coin still resting inside the canvas bag and suddenly understood why the federal response had been so immediate. Marcus turned politely toward Sergeant Cole. For the record, you are speaking with General Angela Marie Brooks, retired 4-star General of the United States Army, former commander of multiple joint operations, recipient of the Distinguished Service Medal, and current senior advisor to the Department of Defense. Every title seemed to drain more certainty from the faces of those who had assumed they understood exactly who she was only an hour earlier. Ryan lowered his eyes, replaying every conversation he had shared with her since the encounter began. He remembered her calm reminders about fairness, her quiet patience, and her refusal to mention her accomplishments even once. She had never attempted to use rank to influence anyone. She had simply expected the same respect every citizen deserved. Marcus stepped closer to the patrol vehicle and spoke softly enough that only those nearest could hear. "Ma'am, are you comfortable?" Angela smiled gently. "I am fine, Marcus. My concern has never been for myself." She glanced toward the teenage boy still standing beside his grandmother across the street. "Please make certain that young man knows his voice matters too." Marcus followed her gaze and nodded without hesitation. Around them, the summer breeze carried the sound of rustling oak leaves while the entire intersection remained wrapped in an almost sacred silence. No one seemed interested in speaking anymore, because the truth standing before them had become far more powerful than anything that could have been said. Lieutenant General Marcus Whitfield stepped closer to the patrol vehicle and spoke quietly with Sergeant Ethan Cole before the rear door was respectfully opened. Angela Brooks slowly stepped onto the pavement, smoothing the sleeve of her faded windbreaker as though she had simply finished an ordinary afternoon appointment. The bright Georgia sun rested low above the rooftops now, washing the street in warm amber light that softened every shadow stretching across the sidewalk. No one moved. The officers stood silently where they were. The residents who had gathered earlier lowered their phones one by one, sensing that they were witnessing something far more meaningful than another viral moment. Marcus extended Angela's canvas tote bag toward her with both hands. "Your belongings, ma'am." She accepted it with a grateful smile. "Thank you, Marcus." Before anyone could speak again, Officer Ryan Walker removed his patrol cap and took 2 slow steps forward. His confidence from earlier had completely disappeared, replaced by an expression that revealed genuine reflection rather than simple embarrassment. He looked directly at Angela, but found it difficult to hold her gaze. "General Brooks," he said quietly, "I owe you an apology." The intersection remained silent except for the gentle rustling of leaves overhead. Ryan continued carefully, choosing each word with obvious sincerity. "I judged the situation too quickly. I assumed I understood who you were before I understood what you were trying to say. I should have listened more carefully." Angela regarded the young officer for several thoughtful seconds. Her face carried neither triumph nor resentment, only compassion. "Officer Walker," she replied softly, "every person eventually reaches a moment that teaches them more than years of routine ever could. The important question is not whether we make mistakes. The important question is what we become after we recognize them." Ryan lowered his eyes for a brief moment before nodding slowly. Nearby, Sergeant Ethan Cole removed his own cap as well. "General," he said respectfully, "regardless of rank, you deserve to be treated with greater patience today. I accept responsibility for my part." Angela smiled gently. "Thank you, Sergeant. Accountability is never easy, but it is where trust begins." A cool breeze drifted through the neighborhood, carrying the scent of freshly cut grass from a nearby park. The American flag above the community center moved softly against the blue afternoon sky. Across the street, the teenage boy Angela had defended watched quietly beside his grandmother, still trying to understand everything unfolding before him. Angela noticed him immediately. She walked across the pavement at an unhurried pace until she stood a few feet away. "Young man," she said warmly, "never confuse respect with silence. You should always speak truthfully, but remember that the strongest voice is often the calmest one." The boy nodded with quiet determination. His grandmother smiled through glistening eyes. "Thank you for standing up for him," she whispered. Angela answered with a gentle shake of her head. He deserved someone to remind him that his dignity matters. Marcus observed the exchange with quiet admiration. He had served beside Angela for decades and knew this was exactly why thousands of soldiers had willingly followed her leadership. Not because she outranked them, but because she consistently placed people before position. The neighborhood seemed different now. The tension that had filled the street earlier had slowly dissolved into thoughtful silence. No one cheered. No one applauded. Instead, people simply watched as ordinary conversations gave way to quiet reflection. Officer Ryan Walker looked around the intersection, realizing that the lesson unfolding before him had very little to do with military titles or federal authority. It had everything to do with the danger of deciding someone's worth before taking the time to understand their character. Standing beneath the warm evening light, Angela Brooks appeared exactly as she had when the afternoon began, wearing the same simple clothes, carrying the same canvas bag, and speaking with the same quiet grace. The only thing that had changed was that everyone else had finally begun to see what had been there all along. As the last rays of sunlight settled across Jefferson Avenue, the official vehicles remained parked quietly along the curb, but the atmosphere had transformed completely. What had begun as an ordinary afternoon had become an unexpected lesson for everyone present. News crews had not yet arrived, and for that brief moment the street belonged only to the people who had witnessed the truth unfold with their own eyes. Lieutenant General Marcus Whitfield received a short phone call before walking back toward Angela Brooks. "Ma'am," he said respectfully, "the Secretary's office has been informed. They wanted me to express their appreciation for the dignity you showed today." Angela smiled almost apologetically. "I hope they also understand that today is not about me." Marcus nodded. "They do." She glanced toward the officers standing quietly beside their patrol vehicles. "Then let us make certain it becomes about something that lasts longer than today's headlines." Marcus understood immediately. He turned towards Sergeant Ethan Cole. "General Brooks would like a few moments with your department, if that is acceptable." Ethan answered without hesitation. "Of course." Within minutes, every officer present gathered in a respectful semicircle near the community center entrance. Residents watched quietly from a short distance, while the teenage boy and his grandmother stood near the front, listening carefully. Angela stepped forward with the same calm posture that had carried her through decades of service. There was no podium, no prepared speech, only a gentle breeze moving through the trees overhead. "During my career," she began, "I had the privilege of leading thousands of men and women wearing uniforms. Every one of those uniforms represented authority, but authority alone never earned trust." The officers remained completely silent. Trust came from listening before judging, from asking questions before reaching conclusions, from remembering that every person standing in front of you has lived a life you cannot see. Ryan Walker listened without blinking, every word settling heavily in his mind. Angela continued, "The uniform you wear is important. I wore one for many years myself. But the character inside that uniform will always matter more than the fabric covering it." Several officers slowly nodded. Even those who had spoken very little throughout the afternoon now seemed completely absorbed by her words. She turned slightly toward the residents gathered nearby. "The same principle belongs to every citizen as well. Respect cannot flow in only one direction. Strong communities are built when people are willing to see one another as neighbors before strangers." A quiet stillness settled over the crowd. No applause interrupted the moment. No dramatic reactions broke the silence. It felt as though everyone understood instinctively that this conversation deserved reflection rather than celebration. Ryan finally stepped forward once more. "General Brooks," he said, his voice steady but humble, "if you would allow it, I would like to learn from today instead of simply regretting it." Angela looked at him with quiet kindness. "That is the best apology anyone can offer." She reached into her canvas tote bag and carefully removed the silver challenge coin that Sergeant Cole had examined earlier. Holding it between her fingers, she studied it for a brief moment before placing it gently into Ryan's hand. His eyes widened immediately. "Ma'am, I cannot accept this." Angela closed his fingers around the coin with a warm smile. "You are not receiving it because you were perfect today. You are receiving it because I believe you can become better tomorrow. Keep it where you will see it often. Let it remind you that every person you meet deserves to be understood before they are judged." Ryan stared quietly at the coin resting in his palm, its polished eagle reflecting the fading evening light. Around him, the neighborhood seemed brighter somehow, not because the sun had returned, but because the weight of assumption had finally given way to the possibility of understanding. In that quiet moment, every person standing on Jefferson Avenue realized that the greatest display of strength they had witnessed all day had not come from rank, authority, or recognition. It had come from grace. The crowd slowly began to disperse as evening settled over the neighborhood, yet very few people seemed eager to leave. Small conversations replaced earlier whispers, and the mood had shifted from uncertainty to thoughtful reflection. Several parents walked over to thank the volunteers at the community center before quietly shaking hands with the officers who remained on duty. There was no celebration, only a shared understanding that something important had happened. Sergeant Ethan Cole approached Angela Brooks once more, holding a small notepad in one hand. "General," he said respectfully, "our chief is on his way. He asked that we extend his personal apology before he arrives." Angela nodded kindly. "I appreciate that, Sergeant. But I hope no one believes today ends with an apology." Ethan looked at her with quiet curiosity. What should happen instead? Angela glanced toward the community center where children were helping fold tables alongside elderly veterans. "Learning," she answered. "Because apologies fade unless they become action." Less than 20 minutes later, Police Chief Daniel Mercer arrived in an unmarked department vehicle. The moment he stepped onto the sidewalk, he walked directly toward Angela without hesitation. Before speaking, he removed his cap as a sign of respect. "General Brooks," he began sincerely, "on behalf of this department and this community, I am deeply sorry that this encounter unfolded the way it did." Angela accepted his words with a gentle smile. "Thank you, Chief Mercer." He continued carefully. "I have already requested a complete review of today's events. We will also expand our annual training on communication, procedural fairness, and community engagement. I do not want this department to miss the opportunity to become stronger." Angela looked around at the officers gathered nearby. "Then include every rank," she said softly. "Leadership training is most effective when everyone learns together." The chief nodded immediately. "We will." Marcus Whitfield smiled quietly, recognizing the familiar pattern that had defined Angela's entire military career. Whenever she was given an opportunity to seek recognition, she redirected attention toward improving the people around her instead. Officer Ryan Walker stepped forward one final time, the silver challenge coin still resting securely in his pocket. "Chief," he said, "I would like to volunteer to help with the training program." Daniel Mercer looked surprised. "You understand that means speaking openly about today?" Ryan answered without hesitation. "Yes, sir. If my mistake can help another officer avoid making the same one, then today should not be forgotten." Angela's expression softened with genuine pride. "That takes courage, Officer Walker." Across the street, the teenage boy smiled quietly as he watched the exchange. Earlier that afternoon, he had believed no one would listen to him. Now he was witnessing adults accept responsibility without excuses. His grandmother leaned closer and whispered, "That is what real strength looks like." The warm evening breeze carried the scent of blooming magnolias through the neighborhood, while golden light reflected across the windows of the community center. Volunteers began stacking the final chairs, and veterans folded American flags with practiced care before placing them into protective display cases. Angela watched them for a long moment before speaking once more. "Every uniform deserves respect," she said gently, looking first at the officers and then at the veterans. "But every person deserves dignity long before they earn a uniform." No one answered immediately because no response seemed necessary. The lesson had already taken root. Chief Mercer extended his hand, and Angela shook it warmly. Ryan did the same. Then Ethan. Then several residents who had remained behind simply to thank her for reminding them that kindness and accountability could exist together. As the official vehicles quietly prepared to leave, the neighborhood no longer remembered the afternoon for misunderstanding or embarrassment. Instead, people would remember the day an ordinary conversation became an extraordinary reminder that justice begins not with power, but with the simple decision to see another human being with fairness before judgment. 3 weeks later, the auditorium at the Regional Police Academy was filled long before the morning session began. New recruits sat beside experienced officers, supervisors shared rows with community leaders, and veterans from the nearby military installation quietly occupied the back of the room. The program had been renamed the Dignity Before Judgment Initiative, not because of one incident, but because everyone involved believed the lesson deserved to outlive the headlines. At the front of the auditorium stood no elaborate stage, only a simple wooden podium with an American flag on one side and the state flag on the other. Police Chief Daniel Mercer welcomed the audience before inviting a special guest to speak. As Angela Brooks walked toward the podium wearing the same quiet smile and carrying the same canvas tote bag, many people noticed that she had chosen ordinary civilian clothing once again. There were no medals displayed across her jacket, no symbols of rank, no reminders of authority beyond the dignity she carried naturally. She thanked the audience for their time before looking slowly across the room. Her eyes paused briefly on Officer Ryan Walker, who now sat in the front row with the Silver Challenge coin resting inside the notebook on his lap. She smiled warmly before beginning. "Every profession places something valuable into your hands," she said. "For some it is knowledge. For others it is responsibility. For many of you, it is public trust. The question is never whether people will remember your title. The question is whether they will remember how you made them feel when they were at their most vulnerable." The room remained completely still. No one reached for a telephone. No one whispered. Every person listened. Angela spoke not about herself, but about ordinary moments that quietly shape extraordinary lives. She described soldiers comforting frightened families during disasters, police officers calming lost children, firefighters reassuring elderly neighbors, teachers encouraging students who believed they had already failed. "Leadership," she continued, "is not measured by how many people salute you. It is measured by how many people feel safe because you were there." Ryan lowered his eyes for a moment before writing those words carefully across the top of his notebook. Months later, the training program had already spread to neighboring departments. Communication workshops became standard practice. Community listening sessions filled local libraries and recreation centers. Officers and residents began meeting over coffee instead of only during emergencies. Progress came quietly, one conversation at a time, just as Angela had hoped. One cool autumn afternoon, Ryan stopped by the community center after finishing his shift. The same teenage boy he had first encountered weeks earlier was helping younger children organize donated books for an after-school reading program. Ryan smiled and handed him a new basketball purchased with his own money. "I thought the center could use this," he said. The boy accepted it with a grateful grin. "Thank you, officer." As Ryan turned to leave, he noticed Angela sitting alone beneath the old oak tree where golden leaves drifted gently across the grass. She was reading a worn history book while the afternoon sunlight filtered through the branches above her. He walked over quietly. "General Brooks." She looked up and smiled. "Good afternoon, Ryan." He sat on the nearby bench for a moment before speaking. "I still carry the challenge coin every day." Angela nodded. "Good." Ryan looked toward the children laughing outside the community center. "It reminds me that every person I meet has a story I have not heard yet." Angela closed her book softly. "Then it has already served its purpose." Neither of them said another word. They simply watched the children run across the grass beneath the warm autumn light while an American flag moved gently in the distance. The breeze carried the quiet sound of laughter through the neighborhood, and in that peaceful silence, there was nothing left to prove, nothing left to forgive, only the enduring reminder that true strength never demands respect for itself because it quietly inspires others to give it freely.